Story 1. I played Pong when I was 5. My parents got us an Atari the next year for Christmas. Story 2. I was 12 years old in 1972. I played a Pong machine at the local pizza place, one of the first ones. Later in life, I married the sister of the man who designed the cabinet. Such was life in Silicon Valley. Story 3. Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt on the Nintendo Entertainment System at my cousin's place. Blowing into the cartridge, the soft cathode ray tube buzz, that bright orange zapper pressed way too close to the screen, and the dog laughing every time I missed. Pure childhood. Story 4. Duke Nukem 3D is 6 years old. It was mind-blowing to be 6 years old and able to give strippers money and see their breasts. Story 5. Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 6 or 7 years old. Story 6. Duck Hunt on the Nintendo Entertainment System when I was about 5 years old. That laughing dog still haunts me. Story 7. Zelda. Ocarina of Time. I was 7 and fell in love with it. I still love it to this day. Story 8. Switched the Master System on without a cartridge, and Alex Kidd appeared. It must have been 4 at the most. Story 9. Pong, like 12. Atari 2600, the only game my oldest sister played. Story 10. Probably Sonic or something on the Sega Mega Drive. My stepfather loved old-school video games, so I played a lot growing up. Story 11. This original Prince of Persia and Lemmings, I guess I was about 5 years old. Story 12. I was 17 in 1975 when I played Star Trek on an automatic speech recognition 33 teleprinter connected to a Hewlett-Packard 100. Story 13. Final Fantasy on Nintendo's Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Story 14. The first video games I played were those that came pre-installed on Windows 7. I was 9 years old. Story 15. Theme Park World on floppy disks on my dad's work computer. I was probably around 5 years old. Story 16. The original packaged Nintendo Entertainment System Mario with my mom. I was about 5 or 6. My mom was a video game expert. She showed me how to play The Legend of Zelda. The day the Super Nintendo Entertainment System came out, my mom took off work to get it and meet me as soon as I got off the bus from school. We played Super Mario World for about a year. She was a cool mom when she could be. Story 17. Space Invaders on an Atari my friend had. They had a lot of money in the early 1980s. Story 18. Oregon Trail. It was sometime around 1980, I think. I would have been 8 or 9 years old. My little brother and I played it on our Apple home computer, but I do not remember which model. It was one of the first computers people started getting in their homes. If I remember correctly, the game came on a floppy disk. Story 19. Burger Time, Q*Bert, and this old Popeye game on my uncle's computer. Story 20. I had to think about this. I was born in 1971. I have a hazy memory of playing a cocktail cabinet version of Pong at a restaurant with my dad. I guess I must have been 4 or so, but I remember thinking this one was different from some other Pong I tried. However, I cannot recall the other Pong I tried. Story 21. Commander Keen running off a floppy disk on a disk operating system personal computer. I was 4. Story 22. My son's Simpsons Road Rage game from around 2005. I was in my late 40s and have been gaming ever since. Story 23. New Super Mario Bros. On the original Nintendo DS. My mother introduced us to it. I remember my brother, my mother, and I on vacation mornings, casually playing the game in my parents' bed in turns, with my mother teaching us how to play. Good times. Story 24. Video game or learning video game? Learning. Oregon Trail on big 5.25-inch floppy disks in 3rd to 5th grade. Our teachers were cool and kept the old Apple II computers, I think that was what they were, in the backs of our classrooms. Video game. The Secret of Monkey Island, sitting on my dad's computer chair as he walked me through the puzzles and Dial-A-Pirate. He had the floppy disks, and even by 1992 we were still using the disks because he was a programmer who loved floppy disks. Story 25. Lemonade stand on an Apple II. I was around 7 or 8 years old. Story 26. I was about 9 or 10, and they had table tennis at the tennis club that our day camp took us to once a week. Story 27. The oldest memory of playing a video game is when I was around 4 years old, playing a Donald Duck game on Nintendo around 1993. Edit. It was Disney DuckTales. Story 28. Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. I was 4 years old. My grandparents got me the Nintendo Entertainment System action set for Christmas of 1988. I do not remember which one I played first. I distinctly remember going back and forth between the two on the menu, but which one I picked is lost to time. I feel like I was more immediately interested in Duck Hunt because it involved ducks, and any 1980s kid would obviously love all things duck. Story 29. Total War. Rome. I was about 6 years old and did not understand much. Story 30. System Shock 2 ran smoothly on my laptop in 2019 when I was 16, before I bought my gaming personal computer. It is an amazing game. Story 31. I played The Legend of Kage and Contra. It was my 5th birthday, and I received a retro console from my father in 1999. Story 32. Super Mario Brothers. But not on a Nintendo console. On a Visual System Super Mario Bros. Cabinet at the Kindercare in Memphis, Tennessee when I was 4. Story 33. Pong 6. But Pong sort of sucked. The first game I played obsessively was Space Invaders around age 10. Story 34. Final Fantasy VII. 3 years old. I have always had exceptional dexterity. And no, I could not read. Story 35. When I was around 3, my older brother played a racing game and wrote me a note detailing what I should press on the keyboard to access it using Microsoft Disk operating system. I couldn't read but compared the symbols on the note to those on the keyboard and succeeded one morning when the rest of my family was asleep, after practicing with my brother beforehand. When my dad woke up, he didn't know about the note or the practice and to this day occasionally mentions how baffled he was. Story 36. I cannot remember my age, but my brother had autism spectrum disorder, and I loved playing Bomb Jack repeatedly. Story 37. The first game I have memories of is Mario Kart 64. I was probably 5 years old. Story 38. I played Snake on my mom's Nokia phone when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Then, a cousin introduced me to Waptrick when I was 7, and that was the beginning of my deep interest. Story 39. Some shark shooting game on the pier at Weston-super-Mare. I think I was about 6. Story 40. Fire from the Game & Watch Nintendo series. Around 8 or 9. Story 41. I cannot remember exactly how old I was, but I know it was a hand-me-down Nintendo Entertainment System with Super Mario Bros. I think I was about 4 or 5, considering that I remember getting it replaced with a PlayStation with Crash Bandicoot 2. Story 42. GoldenEye 007 on Nintendo 64. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. My family and I played it together every Sunday for a long time. Story 43. A Donkey Kong game on a dual-screen Game & Watch. Got it from my dad. I was under 6 because that's when I got Game Boy Advance along with Pokemon Sapphire and a strange Game Boy Color cartridge containing more than 50 unusual bootleg games. Story 44. The first game I know for sure that I played was 1941 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The first one I truly remember playing was either Wolfenstein 3D or King's Quest VI, both of which came with my parents' new personal computer. Story 45. Little Brick Out and Space Eggs on the Apple II, 5 years old, 1980. Story 46. Super Mario on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System or Sonic on the Sega Mega Drive are the two I remember most. I could not save Sonic and tried to hide the fact that I was leaving the Sega on all night so I could continue playing in the morning. Peak Gaming. Story 47. It was a funny Windows game where you managed a cake factory and a dressing room to assemble amusing-looking figures. I still do not know what it was called. I was 4 or 5 years old at the time. Story 48. I played the Spider-Man game, which was my ultimate childhood memory. Story 49. Looney Tunes on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System or Winnie the Pooh on the Game Boy Advance, both around the same time, but I don't know which one was first. I think I was 4. Story 50. I remember playing Sonic on a Sega Game Gear when I was about 6 or 7, before my parents divorced. My aunt or someone had it when they came over and I played it. My first console was probably a Nintendo 64 when I was 7 or 8. The first game was probably Super Smash Bros. Or The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Either that or Pokemon Red on my Game Boy Color. I have a feeling that was first, but I don't remember exactly. Story 51. Space Invaders and Asteroids at the local arcade when I was about 8 or 9. Story 52. Marvel Ultimate Alliance for the original Xbox when I was 5. I played it with my dad. Good memories. Story 53. Pong on the Grandstand. I was there, Gandalf. I was there 3,000 years ago. Story 54. Lego Batman the video game. I was 6 years old, and it was my birthday. My uncle had given me both the Xbox 360 and the original Xbox with many games. I loved Lego very much, and the idea of defeating bad guys in Lego made me choose this game. Batman has been my favorite superhero ever since. Story 55. It was on the PlayStation 1. It was basically a Space Invaders ripoff. Stationary guns where you shot meteors or something similar coming down. I can't remember, but that was it. Story 56. Space Invaders, also known as Alien Invaders Plus on the Odyssey 2. I was 4 or 5 years old. Story 57. At 7 or 8 years old, I played Pokemon and casual browser games on the family laptop. Then came the Brawl Stars era. Story 58. Pac-Man or Tetris, I don't remember clearly. I was about 6 years old, so around 1990. Story 59. The early version of Minecraft, when there were not even trees, I was 3, I believe. Or Grand Theft Auto 5 at around 4 to 5 years old. I am not sure. Story 60. Mario and Duck Hunt or Mega Man 2, I think. I was about 5 or 6 years old. Story 61. I was around 7 years old and remember owning a ColecoVision and playing Donkey Kong. Story 62. I think it was Galaxy in a Game Boy clone, Tetris, and 500 other games included. 5 years old. Story 63. Grand Theft Auto 3. I was 3 to 4 years old. I was visiting my sister who was 18 at the time, and she said, "Little brother is going to play a big boys game now," and gave me the controller. Apparently, I had known that when the light is red, you have to stop, but the police still came to arrest me from the car. I was flabbergasted. What I did not know at the time was that vehicular manslaughter is also a crime. Story 64. Playing Frogger on a British Broadcasting Corporation Model B at primary school. I was about 7 or 8 years old. Story 65. Probably Super Mario or Duck Hunt on my parents' old Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1994 or 1995. Story 66. Ms. Pac-Man in 1982. I was 9 years old. I am now 53 and play all kinds of games, but currently, I am playing The Sims for the most. Story 67. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I was about 4 or 5 years old. So maybe 1994 or 1995. My uncle got me into it. I played as Tails and tried to help him defeat bosses, emphasis on tried, but the lack of coordination was my downfall, haha. Story 68. It must have been tennis on the Atari 2600, which would have been around 3 years old. Story 69. A platformer called Punchy on the Commodore 16. I was about 5 years old. I became hooked. Story 70. Probably my first mobile game was when I was 4 years old. Probably Subway Surfers or something similar. But my first real game was probably Grand Theft Auto 5 on a cousin's console. Then he gave me his old PlayStation 2 and his collection of games. Story 71. I don't remember the exact game, but it was something on an old Sega console in the 1990s. I remember playing Sonic, Paperboy, and a Michael Jackson game. Story 72. It was Bomberman when I was 6. It might be something similar to Bomberman, but I am not certain. Story 73. Buzz Jr. Jungle Party on PlayStation 2. I was probably around 8. Story 74. Maybe Pitfall, maybe River Raid. It's blurry. I remember the taste and the smell of the Atari cartridges though, and the feel of static electricity when hugging the television. Story 75. Mario Nintendo Entertainment System at age 6 with my cousin. Got a Sega Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog at age 7. Story 76. The first game I remember was a Formula One game on a 486 computer. I cannot recall the name or any more details. Story 77. Super Mario. I was 9 and got a Mitashi video game on my birthday. Story 78. Pong. It was not a console like we had later, but a black box and 2 controllers that could only play 1 or 2 player versions of the game. Maybe around 1976 or 1977, as I was in high school. Story 79. I can't remember if it was Pong or Pac-Man. What I do remember is that I was 6 at the time, around the early 1980s. Story 80. No Fear. Downhill mountain bike racing on the PlayStation 1. That was the start of it all, and I haven't looked back. I am 35 now. Story 81. I played Duck Hunt when I was very young but did not really remember it. I remember Sonic the Hedgehog at about 4 years old on the Sega Genesis. Story 82. I have commented about this before because it is one of my core childhood memories. I woke up on Christmas morning to a brand new PlayStation 1 and The Lost World. Jurassic Park playing on the television. My dad had set it up before I woke, and there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex just standing there roaring, waiting for me to play. I was 6 or 7 at the time, and it was such a cool way to wake up on Christmas morning. I will always remember it. Story 83. The first video game I played was really cool, but I don't remember its name. I hope someone can find the name of this game from my description. I played as a white cat with blue eyes. The graphics were geometric, so the character looked more like a cube with 2 triangles on top. Rather than a real cat, you had to go through various levels, but I don't remember exactly what you had to do. At some point, you received a teleportation skill. There was also some kind of story before the game started. I tried to find this game through chatbots, but without success. I am 13 years old now. Story 84. Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 5. So you can only imagine how excited I was when Bonanza got announced. Story 85. Super Mario. I was 7 to 8 years old and pretty much in awe when I saw my brother play at the time and saw his infinite lives. Story 86. Original Spyro on the PlayStation 1. My mother strangely got and played a PlayStation 1 a little. One day I asked if I could try it and she happened to have that game running. I ran around the first hub world for a while before accidentally entering a mission portal. Other than watching her get halfway through Harry Potter on PlayStation 1, I don't think she ever played a video game again. Story 87. Super Mario 64. Probably 6 or 7 out of 10. I still have the save file where my brothers and I managed to get all the stars. I tried to do it on my Nintendo Switch when I got the All-Stars collection. I still struggled to beat the Winged Cap Secret Star. Story 88. Jumpman and Bubble Bobble are 2 that come to mind. I would have been around 5 years old. Story 89. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I would have been about 4 or 5, and Dad left the PlayStation 2 on when he went out. Story 90. I played a Dora the Explorer game when I was about 4 years old on a PC in 2003. Story 91. Around 6 or 7, at a friend's house. He had a bunch of games, and I don't remember which we played first. I remember playing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, Mario Original, Excitebike, and some baseball game that day. Story 92. Frogger, Centipede, Donkey Kong, and possibly others on a Commodore 64. I was probably around 6 years old. Story 93. That frustrating Lion King game on Sega. My 6-year-old child beat it repeatedly over a couple of years. I loved it. I would not attempt to play it nowadays. Story 94. Pong. When I was around 9 or 10. We were addicted. No child would dream about it today. Story 95. Penetrator on the ZX Spectrum 48K. It was released in 1982, so I was about 7 or 8 years old. Story 96. I played some of the Nancy Drew personal computer games with my old babysitter when I was probably 6. Those games scared me back then. Story 97. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was the first game I remember playing around 4 or 5 years old. Story 98. 3, and it was Sonic and Knuckles that could attach to the other Sonic game. Story 99. Wolfenstein 3D, version 4 or 5 is my guess. Then Doom. Then Duke Nukem. Story 100, Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers. Like 6 or 8. I don't really remember. Story 101. It is either Subway Surfers or Grand Theft Auto Vice City. I do not clearly remember. Story 102. I guess it was Gone Oven Eddie when I was 6 or something. I only beat it once. I wanted to try again since you can play it with an emulator on a modern computer. But my computer stopped working 2 years ago. I only have an Xbox now and no possibility to try again. Wait. My wife's laptop just came to my mind at this exact moment. Story 103. Playing ping pong at my friend's house. He was the only family in the neighborhood who could afford it. Story 104. The first video game I ever played was the Curious George game on my mom's computer from Public Broadcasting Service Kids. I was 4 years old. Story 105. I don't remember what it was called. It looked like Poyen, but with worse graphics. I was about 6 or 7 years old. Story 106. The first video game I played was either Tetris on my Game Boy or Gorilla.bas on my IBM XT. I cannot recall which came into my life first. Story 107. Alex Kidd came built into the Sega Master System. I got it for Christmas when I was about 10 years old. Story 108. Super Mario Bros. 3 from Super Mario Bros. All-Stars on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System at age 3. That is a mouthful. Story 109. I played Moonlander, also known as Lunar Lander, on a PDP-11 in a friend's office in the mid-1970s before personal computers were available. My first personal computer game was Raster Blaster, a simulated pinball game on an Apple II in 1980. Story 110. The first game I ever played was Ghostbusters on my brother's Sinclair ZX Spectrum in 1989. I was 4 years old. The first PC game I played was Alley Cat on my dad's old International Business Machines computer when I was 5. Story 111. It was the Captain Crunch game that came with the cereal. Those were simpler times. Story 112. How are we defining video games? I played Oregon Trail, Dungeon, and Zork. The first graphics game I played was Pong. Story 113. Pong. I was around 5. Then Granny's Garden on my primary school's BBC Acorn computer. Story 114. Mortal Kombat 7, maybe? I unironically love the theme song and am still freaked out by Goro. Story 115. Yar's Revenge on my family's old Intellivision. I was maybe 4 years old. Story 116. Golf on the Intellivision when I was 4. I only played it for a few minutes though. I got my Atari 2600 with Space Invaders for my 5th birthday. Story 117. The first game I remember playing is Super Mario Bros. 3, and I was probably 4 or 5 years old. This was in the mid-1990s. Story 118. I think it was Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System. I had to be around 5 years old. Story 119. Probably New Super Mario Bros. Or Mario Kart on Nintendo DS. I was 4 or 5 years old. Story 120. Tank Battle or whatever it was on the Atari, I think. Probably about 5 or 6. Story 121. EA Sports Cricket 2007 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City when I was 8. That was a good time. Story 122. Probably some knockoff fighting game on the PlayStation 1. I remember using Spider-Man to fight someone. The next proper game I played was Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland. Story 123. So, picture me. Before I learned to spell, I can see the jokes, but I must have been about 5 or so since the Amiga 1200 came out in 1992. Complex words like Ichiarsaholes, which was the cheat code for immortality in the one game I remember playing first. You platformed as an elephant and shot peanuts. It might have been on an Amiga 1200. I know later in my life we had that, and I do not recall ever changing it growing up. The game's called CJ's Elephant Antics, and the password always made me laugh. I had to get my parents to type it for me because you would enter it blindly on the menu. I am now watching a long play and remember that boss and that music. I never got far even with immortality. Story 124. My cousin used to have Medal of Honor for GameCube, I believe. I was roughly 3 or 4. Story 125. I was probably 4 or 5. The lady who watched me had a Game Boy, which was her son's old one, and I remember playing Tetris and Home Alone on it. Tetris was awesome, but the Home Alone game was not very good. Story 126. Elite on my friend's computer in about 1985. I was 11 years old. It blew my mind. Story 127. Played Pong around 1973 to 1974 on a dedicated machine connected to my parents' black and white television. Story 128. A game called Combat on Atari 2600. I would have been 6. It was a 2-player tank battle. You could drive in 4 directions and shoot. Parents' friends hosted a big barbecue and had it on in the basement. I only got a few seconds of pixel blasting bliss until losing my turn to the dozens of kids at the barbecue. But I was hooked. Story 129. My sister and I used to fight over the Nintendo Entertainment System, Zelda and Mario. I was young enough that she was able to convince me that we were both controlling Mario even though my controller was unplugged. She would still blame me when she died though. Story 130. My small town had a cool pizza place. It showed movies on a big screen as you ate. It had a room with arcade games, so I thought I would try one out. It was 1981, and I had never played before. Our family did not even have Pong. I think it may have been Pac-Man or Mrs. Pac-Man. I put in a quarter and stood there waiting for it to start. Seconds passed, and nothing happened. Finally, I looked around and discovered that it was not plugged in, and I had wasted a quarter. I decided it was stupid and never played again. Story 131. It was definitely an arcade game, probably similar to Spy Hunter. Story 132. I remember being 4 or 5 years old playing Mortal Kombat with my brother on the Sega Genesis. Story 133. Super Mario Bros. On the original Nintendo Entertainment System. That was a magical moment. Story 134. This is a bit tough, but here is what I know so far. I used to watch Monster School because that is what made my childhood. I was broke and only 4 years old at that time, which I think was around 2013 to 2014. I think I would go with Minecraft copycats. Then I heard of Roblox and it was my first game. Not long ago I had my first Xbox 360, and I played tons of games on it, mostly Grand Theft Auto 5, Rayman Legends, shooter games, and many more. It still sucks to this day. It is not really a big deal, but it was special for me. Story 135. I used to play pinball with my grandfather on his computer. It is one of those memories of things that were always there. I was 2, maybe 3 years old. Story 136. In 1978, I played Space Invaders on a Commodore PET that the local high school brought to my primary school. I was 7 years old. Story 137. Star Wars Arcade was the first game I remember playing. It was at a putt-putt golf course. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Story 138. My first experience was on the Commodore 64 with games written in beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code. Hangman, Battleship, and a Star Trek-based game. Arcade games were in the golden era at the time as well. Story 139. Jill of the Jungle on the computer. I remember being about 2 or 3 years old and having to type in a code to play it. Story 140. Because I am only 18, if mobile games do not count, probably Grand Theft Auto San Andreas on an old PlayStation 2 some family friends gave us. Story 141. Pong, age 18. Rest stop in Maryland. Played with my father, who just did not understand. I defeated him. Story 142. Truly it was Pong and I was probably 8 or 9. Story 143. In 1983, my mom had an Atari 2600. We only knew it as Jumpman, later called Mario. You climbed up a bunch of ladders, jumping and avoiding barrels to rescue a princess. My younger brother and I would play that for hours. Story 144. Pong was the first video game I ever saw, not at an arcade or bar, but at the airport in Huntington, West Virginia. Story 145. Pong. I have no idea how old I was. We got an Atari 2600 when I was 9, I think. It is hard to remember for sure. Story 146. I played Breakout or a similar game with a different name on an Apple II computer when I was 7 or 8 years old. Story 147. The first arcade game was a helicopter game that cost 10 cents. The price was 5 cents. Story 148. The first game I remember playing was Pole Position in the arcades, and I must have been less than 5 years old, around 1982 to 1983. My friend had an Intellivision at home, so I played some kind of soccer game on that, which I did not like. Then, my parents' friend had a ZX Spectrum, and I played Checkered Flag on it. Regarding the Spectrum, my mother died recently, and at her funeral, the friend came up to me and said, "Was I the person who got you into information technology? I think I gave you a ZX Spectrum when you were little." He certainly did. When that Spectrum broke, he gave it to me and I was able to fix it and use it. He was not the first person to give me a computer. I had one of my own by then, but he was likely the first person who let me use one. I told him, "Yes, you can definitely claim that you sparked my interest in information technology." It is pretty cool that he remembered that all these years later. Story 149. It was either Tetris or Super Mario Bros. 2. I was around 4. Story 150. Pretty sure it was one of the Wii U games, maybe Sports or Super Mario World, not sure. Story 151. It could have been at the dentist or on our tandy at home. The kid's dentist had a Pac-Man table and a Mario Brothers machine. At home, my dad's favorite was Kbert. My mom's favorite was Stargate. Nightfire was a 4-player artillery game that we played as a family, with my brother and me sitting on my dad's knees and my mom coming over to take her turn while cooking dinner. Story 152. My first game was Need for Speed 2. My favorite car of all time is still the Jaguar XJ220. Story 153. Space Invaders or Asteroid is from the 1970s. I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Story 154. Hard Hat Mac on a Franklin Ace 1000 computer. Essentially an Apple II Plus clone. Ah, the good old days. Story 155. The Secret of Monkey Island. 6 years old. My father showed it to me. Wonderful memories. Still one of my favorites. Story 156. Space Invaders on the Commodore 64. I watched my parents play when I was little, as it was my mother's favorite game. I was probably around 5 years old when I first tried to play. Story 157. I cannot remember. It was a Japanese handheld device from the mid-1980s. Story 158. Mine was Super Mario World. Super Mario Advance 2, sometime between 2 to 4 years old. Story 159. Some Harry Potter game for the Nintendo GameCube. I was probably 7. Story 160. Probably Pinball 95. That or Moorhun. 4 or maybe 5. But the first real one was Halo 3 Cooperative with my brother at my cousin's place. I guess I was about 10 years old. Story 161. I think the first game I played was Gunfight at the local amusement park when I was around 10 years old. My parents eventually got a Pong game for me because I liked the arcade games. Story 162. I remember playing video games well before I could read and having to specifically ask for games that could be played without reading. I had not learned to read yet. The first games I played were the original Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, and Mario Bros. 3. The Nintendo Entertainment System Contra was in there somewhere too. Nothing else was memorable enough to be retained. To this day, I am proud of myself for finally beating World 8 on Mario Bros. 3. That was very difficult back in the day as a small child. Story 163. Space Invaders 9 years old. Pong was included, but I got Space Invaders at the same time. Story 164. I think it was Call of Duty, Modern Warfare or Call of Duty when I was about 4 years old. My granddad had a collection of Call of Duty games up to around 2013. He continued to play them until 2023. I became really good at Call of Duty and still am, and if it weren't for him, I would be terrible. My first owned game was Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare. He also taught me how to play. Story 165. I got Combat and Air and Sea Battle and my Atari 2600 for Christmas, so it was definitely one of those. If we are talking stand-up video games, it was Space Invaders. Story 166. The first video game I remember playing was Star Wars Rogue Squadron when I was about 5 years old. Story 167. I have no idea how old I was. Somewhere, my dad kept a Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller with teething dents, so I would say I was young. Playmates is available on the Nintendo Switch online virtual service. And Nintendo Way of the Ninja. Both Super Nintendo Entertainment System games frustrated me because I couldn't read. Final Fantasy and Mario RPG taught me how to read and do math. Story 168. No idea what it was called or even what the mechanics were, but I remember a goblin. Story 169. Original Prince of Persia or Prehistoric. Not sure which was first. I was 5 or so. Story 170. Jumpman Jr. on Commodore 64 or Pac-Man on Atari 2600. I was probably 3. Story 171. Manic Miner. I watched my older brother play it and learned some swear words from him that day. I played it after him, which led me to use the same swear words. My dad heard me and turned the Commodore 64 off. Story 172. Either Turbo or the Smurfs on ColecoVision. I was about 6 or 7 years old. Story 173. I was in my 40s in 1998 or so when Microsoft's Combat Flight Simulator came out. I was never very interested in gaming until we got our first computer and my wife discovered the Pogo-type gaming sites. She suggested I look into something, and I had always been a World War II air war enthusiast. And down the rabbit hole I went. Story 174. We had Atari and Coleco, but those were more my older brothers and I didn't play them much. The first games I really remember playing were around 1988 or so. I was 8, and my aunt went to the United States and brought us back our first Nintendo. It came with Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, World Class Track Meet, and the controller. We lived in Canada, and it was before anyone I knew had it. We were absolutely kings among my friend group. Those 3 games got a lot of use. Story 175. Officially, I played Super Mario Bros. On a Nintendo Entertainment System at age 5. However, I think I technically had my first gaming experience with an arcade cabinet that had a trackball controller. This was at a Subway restaurant around 1989. The game was either a golf game or Breakout. Story 176. It was on Atari, maybe Moon Patrol. I must have been 7 or 8 years old. Story 177. It was a cartridge that came with Atari called Freeway. It featured a chicken trying to cross the road. Edit. I honestly don't remember how old I was, but probably under 10. Story 178. I played Pong on a machine in the lobby of the local diner in late 1972. In early 1980, I bought an Apple IIE and a text-based adventure game called Adventure, if I recall correctly. Story 179. The first game I can actually remember playing without my dad or brother doing all the hard work is the first Spyro. Before that, I remember playing Pokemon Blue with my dad. Story 180. Not to date myself, but when I was 15, nobody used the words video game. Story 181. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. My dad had one of those old-school setups that needed a cassette tape connected to the television. We played some side-scrolling game and Pong. Then we won a computer from a grocery store raffle and had a computer in the basement. Story 182. Pong at a bar in 1976. Even then, I thought it was a revolution. Story 183. The first game I remember is Riven, at age 5 on my mother's office computer. I spent countless hours walking around without solving a single puzzle. Story 184. I played Midway and B-1 Bomber on a TRS-80 Model 2 when I was 11. Story 185. PlayStation 1? But I don't know the first game, either Big Game Hunter 2000 or Tekken 3. Story 186. Wow, seeing the comments, I am young. No means to offend, but anyway, my first game I think was on the Wii, and it was Super Mario Bros. Story 187. Santa Parvia and Fumacho on a Tandy Radio Shack 80, probably around 12 or 13 years old. It has been nearly half a century. Story 188. I don't remember clearly. I was born in 1990 and have very vague memories of Super Mario on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System at daycare. So I will just say Super Mario. Story 189. When I was about 12 or 13, my dad's friend who owned half of a video game store came over and was shocked to see me reading on the couch with the television off. The next time he came over, He promptly gave me an old Xbox 360. My first video game was Call of Duty, but then I completely got hooked on Halo. Story 190. The first game I remember is Joust. That game was very fun. However, my mom says it was either Asteroids or Pac-Man. Chances are they gave me a controller when I was very young, and I just have no recollection of it. Story 191. I feel like I remember playing Sonic the Hedgehog first and foremost. Dad had a Sega Genesis. It is hard to say though, because the daycare I went to had a Nintendo 64 and also some of those plug-and-play television games like Frogger. Story 192. The two I recall, which might not have been the first, are Project Internet Graphics Initiative and the Virtual Safari demonstration. Story 193. Cool math games. What games? I can't remember, but I was around 4 to 6 years old, so you can't really blame me. Around that time, I started playing Pop Tropica, which was my first love. Story 194. Probably Lego Indiana Jones or Little Big Planet when I was about 3 years old. Story 195. My parents bought me Age of Empires as a kid for personal computer. I loved gaming. At 19, I played Call of Duty on Xbox and became a full-time gamer. Story 196. Some billiards game on an unknown console. It was from around 2006 to 2007. Story 197. Hangman on an International Business Machine's personal computer. Loaded via floppy disk A. I was probably 5. Story 198. As far back as I can remember, it was Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt combo for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Story 199. I don't remember where, but I know at one point I played one of those original 1970s Palm consoles. Story 200. Super Mario Brothers at age 4, maybe 3. Edit. It was also the 1990s. Story 201. One of the games that came with the Magnavox Odyssey. I was only a couple of years old, so I do not know which one specifically it was. I remember the Haunted House game was my favorite. Story 202. Jet Set Radio Future. I was 2 years old at the time. Looking back on it, I realized my mother and grandmother set me up to play games because it was the only time I would sit still somewhere where they could keep an eye on me, as I was a little nightmare running around causing chaos. I still prefer asymmetrical controllers today. I am also looking forward to the next Jet Set Radio game. Story 203. Star Wars Episode 3. Revenge of the Sith video game on the original Xbox. Story 204. We had an Odyssey. I think I was maybe 3 and we played a racing game and a slot machine game. Story 205. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time. I was 4 years old and my cousins were a bit older and played with me. They revealed to me when I was older that, most of the time, my controller was not plugged in. Story 206. WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 for PlayStation 2 or perhaps Pokemon on the Game Boy. 6 out of 7. Story 207. The earliest game I remember is The Legend of Zelda when I was 5, but I am confident it was not my first game. Story 208. I'm pretty sure it was Galaga on the Atari 7800. It was 1991 or 1992. I was 5 or 6. Story 209. I do not remember exactly, but I think it was Need for Speed Undercover when I was 4 to 5 years old. I am 19 now. Story 210. Quackshot or Castle of Illusion on the Mega Drive, around 4 or so, probably. Story 211. I don't remember the name of the first game I ever played. An educational game on the family's 286 computer, which was on the floor in the living room. I remember helping my dad move the record player to make space. I was 4 or 5 years old. My first game was Test Drive 2, The Duel. I was 5. It was the first game where I had a save file. The first game I ever beat was the original The Legend of Zelda. I was 4 days short of being 6. Story 212. Probably a series of Super Mario games on a website called 123 Games or something like that. I must have been around 5 years old, I think. Story 213. Tetris in 1989. I was 4 years old. My father disapproved of video games, so I did not see another one until I was 9, when it became harder for him to control that. This was both because of the increasing popularity of games and because I was getting older. I was getting my fix at school or right after it. Finally, he gave up and let me have a console of my own. Story 214. Pac-Man tabletop arcade game at my local Godfather Pizza in 1983. I was 6 years old. Story 215. Leisure Suit Larry, early 1990s. I was about 8 or 9 years old. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.